Hello, and welcome to the Middle East Forum Speaker Webinar Series and podcast. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have David Rose, author and the Politics and Investigations editor of the Jewish Chronicle, join us to discuss revealing Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps' activities in Britain. Mr. Rose will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. David Rose.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to join you all. So my job is, as it sounds, I write about politics as it affects the Jewish community, the Middle East, and so on. And I also run investigations. My main background is as an investigative reporter. I worked for some time for Vanity Fair, which is a publication I'm sure you're all familiar with, as well as many well-established UK newspapers and also BBC television. In the last year or so, I have managed to carry out several investigations into aspects of the Iranian regime's activities in the UK. And of course, the IRGC is at the heart of a lot of that. The background here is that a debate has been raging for months now within the British government, within the cabinet, as to whether the IRGC should be proscribed in the United Kingdom as a terrorist organization. Now, that under UK law would have several immediate effects that many of us consider would be very beneficial. It will become a criminal offence under the Terrorism Act to publicly support the IRGC, to assist its funding in any way. And much of what I have been uncovering in the past year would actually become illegal. At the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2023, reporters were briefed by advisors to senior ministers that this was about to happen. And then suddenly everything went into reverse and it didn't happen, and it still hasn't happened. The reason it appears is that the Foreign Office and the Foreign Secretary, the equivalent of the Secretary of State in the United States, James Cleverly, believes it's not in the UK's interests to do so at this time. Various contradictory reasons have been given for this, such as that if we were to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety as a terrorist organization, it would lead to the closure of the British Embassy in Tehran, which is a useful window on the country and also somewhere where intelligence gathering can be carried out. It has been suggested that this will reduce any prospect of any kind of deal to curb Iran's nuclear activities and so on. But it's quite clear that many figures in the government are strongly in favour of doing so, as are MPs of all parties in the Westminster Parliament. So against that political background, I have been carrying out this investigation. The first big story I did concerned an institution called the Islamic Centre of England, or ICE. This is a very large mosque in a converted movie house in central London in Maida Vale, which is entirely controlled by the Iranian regime, to the extent that the head of this institution, which was founded, I believe, in 1995, as part of its kind of statutes, will always be the personal United Kingdom representative of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And indeed, the current director, Sayed Musavi, is just that. Now, bizarrely, this institution is also a charity, what you might call a non-profit, which means it enjoys all kinds of tax breaks. It's already been the subject of one investigation by the Charity Commission, which regulates this sector, which found in 2020 that it was harbouring extremism after it organised a vigil attended by over 2,000 people, including children, to mourn the death of Soleimani, Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC's terrorist mastermind, who was killed in a US drone strike in early 2020. Notwithstanding this investigation and the fact that the Charity Commission issued it with a formal warning because of its association with extremism, and the fact that also it was hosting a whole series of preachers who were urging the crushing of the recent protests in Iran, I discovered that in the fall of 2022, this mosque was used to film a video of a song called Salute Commander or Hello Commander. This is an Iranian propaganda song which celebrates the regime and looks forward to the coming of the Imam Mahdi, the mysterious 12th Imam, who's been absent from the surface of the planet for some 1,200 years, and who, according to so-called Twelver Shiite theology, will return to Earth at the head of a mighty band of warriors known as the 313, the 313. But he will only do so once world Jewry and the state of Israel have been exterminated. The surviving barrier, according to regime, the existing barrier, according to regime ideology, to the return of Imam Mahdi is the Jewish community and Israel. So there they were, some 150 Iranian school children attending a school owned by the Islamic Republic of Iran, a few miles from the ICE mosque, singing an English version and also in Farsi of this song, Salute Commander, which was a huge propaganda hit through much of 2022 in Iran. So that was the first story that I did. The next investigation, which was published earlier this year, I think in March, I did a series of interviews with a woman called Catherine Perez Shakdam. Now, some of you may have noticed this woman. She's written one or two articles for the Jerusalem Post. She's been attached to various think tanks, but she conducted an extraordinary thing. She infiltrated the heart of the Iranian regime and paid numerous visits there up until shortly before the pandemic, attending conferences organized by a man called Talebzadeh, who was one of the Iranian regime's leading ideologists. And she was so trusted, and I've seen the photographs, and we published the photographs that prove this. She was so trusted that she got to meet Ibrahim Raisi, the current hardline president. She met Ayatollah Khamenei himself. She had a private audience with him, and she was attending these conferences organized by this New Horizons organization run by Talebzadeh, which were a kind of ragbag of the extreme right, including neo-fascist members of the European Parliament, members of European neo-fascist parties, and the extreme left, and people from Hezbollah, from Hamas, and other terrorist organizations. And in the course of this, she discovered that the regime, and this is something which is now supported by many sources, was carrying out what it called mapping of the international Jewish community, finding out, using surveillance agents to find out where prominent Jews lived, what their habits were, and how potentially they could be assassinated. Well, I published this story one week, and then the following week I did an exclusive interview with Tom Tugendhat, who is the British Security Minister. I guess he's the equivalent of the head of Homeland Security in the United States, although he is an elected official. And he said that he absolutely confirmed that British security forces, with the British Security Service MI5, had foiled at least 15 assassination plots masterminded by the IRGC in the previous 12 months. He said the same thing in the House of Commons. And he also revealed that they were using organized criminal networks to do much of the dirty work for them, and indeed were trying to identify possible Jewish targets. So this seemed to be pretty high-level confirmation of the accuracy of what Catherine Perez Shakdam was saying. The third vein of stories that I got into, which started at the beginning of June, I managed to work out an algorithm with a colleague to go through Google Scholar to figure out whether there had been academic collaborations between British academics at British universities, or not necessarily British nationals, but academics at British universities and those with universities in Iran. And I was particularly interested in what collaborations I could find between British and Iranian scientists in weapons or dual-use technology. Well, I hit the jackpot because I discovered that there were at least 21 papers published in the last few years in these fields of technology, which were doing things like trying to work out new ways of making military drones, engines more efficient, battlefield communication systems, quantum computing and quantum sensors, jet engines for the next generation of military aircraft. And not only were these collaborations involving British and or British-based and Iranian scientists, but some of the Iranians were at sanctioned universities, universities which are explicitly on the UK sanctions list. Which means that there is a strong possibility that some of those engaged in these collaborations were in fact breaching UK law. Well, I did 3 separate stories in consecutive weeks in this field. And then at the end of June, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, stood up in the House of Commons during his weekly session of Prime Minister's Questions and was asked a question about the investigations that we've been publishing in the Jewish Chronicle by David Davis, who's a former cabinet member, a very high-ranking Conservative MP, asked about the investigations that we've been publishing. And Rishi Sunak said, we are now following this with an official investigation. And in fact, just last week, I reported that investigation by 5 separate government departments collaborating together is now nearing the point where it is likely to be able to send the file to the prosecuting authorities who have the power to look at these things, to see if sanctions law has been broken. And they are indeed looking at 21 academics at UK universities and 11 separate universities, including real blue chip institutions. The universities that I named in my articles included Cambridge, Imperial College London, which is the British equivalent of MIT, Glasgow, and several other highly regarded institutions. The last story I'll mention before we come to Q&A was published in early August. And working with my friend Kasra Arabi, who is now IRGC Research Director of United Against a Nuclear Iran, previously he was at the Tony Blair Institute in London, we discovered that an organization called the Union of Islamic Students of Europe, which is based in West London, in a building called the Kanun Tawheed, which means Center for Monotheism, we discovered that the guy who runs this, Atai Abadi, was running online talks for students at British and European universities by IRGC commanders, including people with long and bloodthirsty records of crushing dissent inside Iran, of taking military support for Hezbollah and Hamas and so forth. And we managed to get hold of 2 recordings of talks that had been piped straight into UK universities by senior commanders in the IRGC. And they were absolutely blood-curdling. They were advocating pure regime ideology involving the return of the Mahdi, advocating the slaughter of Jews, wiping out the state of Israel, and so on. Now, this story was published in August when Parliament was in recess, so there hasn't yet been any direct political fallout from this. But a number of senior members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords have now pitched in and said, this is yet further evidence that really the time to act is now and to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization. This just can't be allowed to go on much longer. It's getting beyond a joke. Well, I'm right now in Manchester, the delightful city in the northwest of England, where my own darling wife hails from, covering the Conservative Party conference. And I will be visiting with a number of politicians and MPs later on this evening in an attempt to discover whether there is any sign of movement, whether the government is getting closer to prescribing the IRGC. I talked to some sources last week. It seemed to me that nothing really is happening, but maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because in my opinion, this is something that is long overdue. So that's 4 investigations that I've published since November last year in the past 10 months. All of them, I suggest, only strengthen the case that we have to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist entity in its own right. We do have sanctions against certain individuals who are IRGC commanders, including several of those who have spoken in these online talks to people at British universities. But of course, merely sanctioning people is quite a weak tool, because most of them don't have any UK assets. There's nothing to freeze. And of course, the IRGC is prescribed in America, where it's a designated terrorist entity. It really wouldn't make that much difference, it seems to me, just having an individual in the IRGC on the sanctions list. So I think the time has come to prescribe it in its entirety, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. So please give me your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. The first question is from lawyer Andrew Rosemarine, who helps Iranian dissidents in UK courts. He asks, as the UK's ruling conservatives have prioritized business interests in Iran over the security of UK, Iranian, and Israeli citizens, haven't your praiseworthy articles been undermined by your newspaper's 15 years of being too nice to the conservatives?
Well, I wouldn't say that, no. And by the way, we are very supportive of Iranian dissidents, and I have good connections in the Iranian dissident community who include many brave people. It was reported by the Sunday Times not long ago that the Iranian TV channel Iran International, which includes a number of dissidents amongst its staff, it temporarily had to shut down its London operations because the threat to its journalists was so extreme. We are, fully in support of those individuals and others who are taking a very brave stand against the regime. And I mean, the paper is broadly aligned with the Conservative Party, but it's certainly not a Conservative Party newspaper. And we publish a lot of opinion articles from people who are supportive of the Labour Party and are on the left. So I wouldn't really accept that comment.
Sounds good. Thank you. Barry Werner asks, why has this been tolerated for so long?
Well, that is a really good question. Why has it been tolerated for so long? The thing that I find most puzzling is this. Right back at the beginning of the year, when suddenly reporters were getting told by well-placed sources that prescription of the IRGC was around the corner, I talked to somebody extremely close to the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, and I was told, yeah, he gets this. He is behind this. And then rapidly it became apparent that, in fact, the Foreign Office did not want this to happen. Now, there's a phrase that sometimes people use in the UK. They talk about the blob, by which they mean the sort of unseen mass of bureaucrats and interests who uphold particular positions and sometimes prevent politicians who want to pull one of the levers of power in a political direction or in a particular direction. They kind of try to stop that happening. I think that's what's happened here. I think what we're looking at is pushback from the Foreign Service, the career Foreign Service bureaucrats. There is a big difference between the way that the Foreign Service in the UK and in the United States is ordered. The political layer in the Foreign Office in the UK is much smaller than that in the United States. I think it's more difficult for politicians to stand out against the career Foreign Service interests. And I think what we've seen here so far is the Foreign Service and also, I suspect, the Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, pushing back because they think that there is still something to be achieved by leaving the door open with Iran, with trying to engage with the regime. Now, the Biden administration, clearly looking at events in the last few weeks, the unfreezing of funds and so forth, appears to be moving in the same direction. People seem to be desperate to let Iran get away with almost everything, provided they don't actually make a nuclear weapon. I think this is a huge misreading of the situation. I think we are talking about an overtly and avowedly revolutionary regime with revolutionary goals, using revolutionary methods, including extreme violence, when it suits it. And so I think, to answer the question, I think it is the blob pushing back. I think they have to be resisted.
Thank you. Larry Greenberg asks, like the US, does the UK treat Iranian warfare as worthy of legal action and policing? Must we await horrendous acts of terrorism before our politicians wake up?
Well, I've had a number of conversations with a guy called Stuart Pollack, Lord Pollack, who is the parliamentary chair of Conservative Friends of Israel. And he's a very brave and extremely well-informed guy. Some years ago, he ran a long and for a long time lonely campaign to proscribe the Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. And he eventually won that campaign. And he's now doing the same thing with Iran and trying to get action here too. But, it is an uphill struggle. I think it will take time. And I've talked to Stuart, as I say, on numerous occasions. And this is his great fear, that finally the IRGC will commit an atrocity, an assassination, perhaps something, a mass casualty attack. And at that stage, all these arguments will, of course, instantly melt away and people will pretend they never made them. I hope it doesn't come to that.
Absolutely. Stephen Orlow asks, were there any arrests in the cases where the assassinations were thwarted? Any trials? And are those IRGC associated individuals you describe British citizens?
Well, the honest answer to the last part of that question is I simply don't know, because to answer the rest of the question, no, nobody has been charged or arrested. Now, we did see in Greece earlier this year, in Athens, 2 Pakistani nationals arrested with bomb-making equipment and explosive material, planning a bombing campaign against Jewish targets in Greece at the behest of the IRGC. Now, what is interesting is that they were, as I say, Pakistani nationals from the Pakistani Shiite community. Now, I know from other research I've done and articles I've published looking at this network of Iranian-controlled mosques in the UK, that the Pakistani heritage, Pakistani-descended Shiite community is of enormous interest to the Iranians. They see them as fertile grounds for recruitment. Now, another story I did actually at the end of last year concerned a college called the London Islamic College. Again, it's an Iranian front. It's controlled by the regime. It is, in fact, the UK branch of the Al Mustafa University in the Iranian holy city of Qom. That is sanctioned as a IRGC terrorist entity and a recruiting ground by the United States. Yet the Al Mustafa College affiliate in the UK, London Islamic College, continues, although my article did lead to a London university, the Middlesex University, severing its previous connection with it. It had been validating its degree courses in Islamic theology. Now, the thing about students at that college is that they get to spend a year or longer in Qom. And that is a place where people are directly radicalized and in many cases recruited. Hundreds of people who have gone through the Al Mustafa University on these programs for foreign students to be radicalized have ended up fighting in places such as Syria with Hezbollah. They've ended up in operations to support Hamas and so on. Yeah, it's quite worrying. But the full picture, because nobody has yet been charged or arrested, we don't quite know.
Thank you. Jack Kushner asks a quick question here. Before I make my annual contribution to the University of Sheffield, is Sheffield one of the universities involved with Iran?
I think I did identify one less serious collaboration, but it certainly wasn't one of the main culprits. No, I think you're probably safe continuing with that donation. I think there may have been, I think it was, if my memory serves, it was not an overtly sort of military type thing. The worst offender, frankly, is one of the worst is Cambridge, which really is quite surprising.
Absolutely. Thank you. And towards the end, I'll be asking you where we can find some of these articles. Alan Liebler asks, can we assume that the IRGC is undertaking the same mapping of other world Jewish communities? And have you alerted the leadership of these communities, if so?
Well, I think now the leadership of those communities is well aware. Yes, I mean, we are talking about diaspora communities around the world. I mean, we've seen that these arrests in Athens, these 2 Pakistani nationals who, as I say, actually had a bomb. But it was also reported in the Israeli press last year, an astonishing operation by the Mossad, where they managed to infiltrate Iran and interrogate a leading IRGC colonel in his own house. And he confessed to being involved in plots to murder Jews and Israelis in Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken. I think, they had their eye on a French Jewish journalist of some prominence. So, I mean, this is an international phenomenon, and it's purely perhaps luck that there has not yet been an atrocity of that kind.
Thank you. Murdad Kansari asks, have you made any investigations or followed matters regarding the threat that was posed to Iran international journalists last year, forcing them to abandon their operations in the UK? Is the fact that Iran International has resumed activities in London, does that suggest that the security forces feel the threat to these journalists has diminished?
Well, I think it actually reflects the fact that they've taken elaborate precautions to improve their own security more than anything else. I am in touch with people in Iran International. I have not done direct reporting on that issue simply because the Sunday Times has covered that story extensively and done a very good job about it. So, there's plenty for me to investigate elsewhere. But yeah, that was basically a Sunday Times story.
Thank you. Art Toff states, as a citizen of Canada, I'm used to the government's opening investigations, then kick the can down the road, and then no action. Should this same weak procedure happen in the UK, what are your alternatives to escalate the process?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the investigation into the technical collaborations, I mean, what can you do? You're a journalist. You dig out facts. You try to make sure that they're absolutely watertight, accurate. You publish it. And if politicians do take some action, you hope it leads to something meaningful. But I mean, if it doesn't, I mean, my job is to report, to investigate, to dig. I'm not an advocate. That's for someone else. And so, if no action is taken, there won't be a great deal that I can do.
Understood. Thank you. So, do you have any further investigations in the work that you could tell our viewers about?
Well, I mean, I think we are looking at probably, continuing work in this field. I've become interested in interfaith. I discovered, and indeed we put on the front page 2 weeks ago, that the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Church of England, had the previous week hosted an interfaith event. And one of those invited was the former head of the ICE, an Ayatollah called Shamali, who is now based at an institute in Qom, where he still travels widely. On one side of his face, he talks about interfaith relations and wanting to build bridges with Christian communities. On the other side of his face, he is a director at a center in Qom, founded by one of the most hardline extremist revolutionary ideologues that the Iranian regime has ever produced, a man called Ayatollah Mesbah Yazdi. So there was the Archbishop of Canterbury having tea and cake with the co-director of actually, you can say an institute. It's called the Imam Khomeini Institute for Science and Research. I think is it Science and Education and Research. This is probably the single most important ideological powerhouse of the IRGC. And so this guy, there he was, taking tea with the Archbishop of Canterbury. But what I discovered is it wasn't the first time. He's done it at least twice before. And Lambeth Palace, the spokesman for the Archbishop, just said, well, what's the harm in it? What's the harm in it? You're having an IRGC ideologue inside Lambeth Palace pretending, I mean, absolutely, a sheep in wolf's clothing, or sorry, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, to me, it's nuts. And I think, that's a field that we need to look at more, because I think there's quite a lot more where that came from. And I mean, I'm actually uncovering, very interestingly, how people from some radical institutions controlled by the Iranian regime in the UK have actually forged links with British police forces and have had events, lovely events where they celebrate the Eid with police chiefs and revolutionary ideologues. Wow.
Wow, indeed. So can you please tell our viewers where we can find your past investigative articles, as well as where we can keep apprised of any further work?
Well, I mean, the pieces I've referred to, the easiest way to do that. So go to the Jewish Chronicle website, which is www.thejc, as in the plus the initials newspaper, thejc.com. And if you then do a search under my name, click on my name, and you'll just find all the articles I've written quite easily. And you can just scroll down and decide which ones interest you. That's probably the simplest way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the close of our webinar. Thank you again, Mr. Rose, for joining us today.
It's been entirely a pleasure. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks. For our viewers, please join us Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern for Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.